The first time my upstairs neighbor knocked on my door, she was holding a mop and bleeding from her left hand. Not badly, just a thin red line across her palm where she'd apparently grabbed the wrong end of a broken shelf bracket. She held the mop in one hand and her bleeding palm up like she was presenting evidence, and when I opened the door, she said, "Hi, I'm Lily. I live above you. Do you have a Band-Aid?" I said, "Yeah, come in." She said, "I'm dripping on your floor." I said, "It's fine." She said, "It's really not. I'm so sorry." That was how I met Lily. I'd moved into the building 8 months earlier after the kind of year I don't talk about much. 31 years old, recently single after a relationship that had quietly collapsed over about 14 months before either of us admitted it out loud. And I'd left the house we'd shared in Columbus and moved to Portland because I had a job offer and because I needed somewhere that didn't have her fingerprints on every wall. That sounds dramatic. I don't mean it dramatically. I just mean that sometimes a city gets associated with a version of yourself you're done being, and I was done being the version of me that kept trying to make something work that had been finished for a long time. The apartment was fine. 3rd floor, corner unit, 1 bedroom, windows that faced west, so I got good light in the afternoons. The building was older, one of those converted early-century brick buildings where the pipes made sounds at night, and the elevator was small enough that you could feel the person next to you breathing. I mostly kept to myself. I knew my across-the-hall neighbor was a guy named Marcus who worked nights and slept during the day. I knew the woman on my floor 2 doors down had a small dog that she walked at exactly 7 every morning. I did not know the person above me until the mop and the Band-Aid. I sat Lily down at my kitchen counter and found the first aid kit I kept under the sink, the kind that comes in a green plastic case that you buy at CVS and never open until you need it. The cut wasn't deep. I cleaned it and covered it, and she watched me the whole time with this expression I couldn't quite read. Not embarrassed exactly. More like she was deciding something. "What happened?" I asked. "I was trying to put up a floating shelf," she said. "The bracket was bent, and I tried to bend it back with my hand, and obviously that was a bad idea." Obviously. I didn't have pliers. "I have pliers." She looked at me. "You're going to make me feel worse about this." "I'm not trying to." "You have a first aid kit and pliers." "I'm a prepared person." She smiled at that. It was a small smile, the kind that starts at one corner and takes a second to reach the other side. She had dark hair pulled up in a bun that had mostly given up on being a bun, and she was wearing paint-stained overalls over a white t-shirt. And she looked like someone who had been doing a project for several hours and had not planned to be sitting in her neighbor's kitchen when she started it. "I've lived here for 2 years, she said. "I don't think I've ever seen you." "I moved in last fall," I said. "I work a lot." She said it like an explanation and maybe also an apology. "I'm in residency. Internal medicine, the schedule is." She paused. "It's a schedule." That's a diplomatic way to put it. I've gotten good at diplomatic. I handed her the first aid kit to hold while I put the supplies away. Her good hand rested on top of it, and she looked around my kitchen with the easy curiosity of someone who's used to being in unfamiliar spaces. Later, I would learn this was a doctor thing, the ability to take in a room quickly and find what's relevant. At the time, I just thought she was comfortable, and it had been a while since someone had been that comfortable in my space. "Thank you," she said. "I'm going to go finish the shelf." "With pliers?" "With the pliers you're going to lend me." I laughed. I hadn't expected that. I got the pliers. I didn't see her again for 11 days. I know it was 11 because I counted, which I didn't realize I was doing until I stopped counting. The building had a shared laundry room in the basement, and I ran into her there on a Tuesday evening, and she was leaning against the machine in scrubs reading something on her phone. And she looked up when I came in and said, "The shelf is up. No blood this time." "Good use of the pliers," I said. "Good pliers." We did laundry at the same time and talked for 40 minutes, and I learned that she was from Scottsdale originally, that she'd done her undergrad at Northwestern, that she had a succulent collection on her windowsill that she was, in her words, actively trying not to kill, and that she had been in Portland for 3 years but still sometimes got surprised by the rain, which she said with the self-deprecating awareness of someone who knows they should not still be surprised by the rain. I told her I was a structural engineer. I just started with a firm downtown that did mostly commercial work. Some residential. She said that sounded like a job where you had to be right the first time. And I said yes. That was more or less accurate. She said medicine was the same way. I said I imagined the stakes were a bit higher in medicine. She said, sometimes, and sometimes someone just has a shelf problem and needs a pliers. I walked back upstairs with her. She stopped at her floor. I kept going. At the landing, she looked up and said, thanks again. For before. You already thanked me? I know. I was having a bad day when that happened. The shelf was supposed to be a project to make the apartment feel more like mine, and I managed to hurt myself and bleed on a stranger's floor. So, it wasn't a bad day, I said. It was a good story. She looked at me for a second, then that one corner first smile again. Yeah, she said. Okay, it was a good story. After that, we kept running into each other in the way you do when you live in the same building and you've started paying attention. Coffee shop on the corner. She liked an Americano with 1 sugar. I know because I was behind her in line one morning and watched her order. Parking garage on the ground floor. Her car was a gray Honda Civic with a Northwestern alumni sticker on the back that was starting to peel at the top corner. Elevator. We rode up together several times and talked about nothing specific and everything a little. The way you do when you have 6 floors to fill. She was funny in a way that snuck up on you. She didn't make jokes so much as she made observations, dry and precise, and if you caught them, you felt like you'd been let into something. I caught them. I started to look forward to catching them. I told myself it was just neighborly. We were friendly neighbors, that was a normal thing to be. I told myself that for a while. It was a Friday in November when the elevator broke. Not broke dramatically. Just stopped working. The building management sent an email at 4 in the afternoon saying it would be out until Monday at the earliest. Maintenance was scheduled. They apologized for the inconvenience. I saw the email and thought about the groceries I needed to carry up 3 flights and texted my friend Kevin about it because I had to tell someone. And Kevin texted back, nightmare, with a skull emoji, which was the appropriate response. I was coming up the stairs around 7 with 2 bags of groceries when I heard footsteps behind me and then Lily's voice, tell me you got the good pasta. I looked back. She was coming up from the 2nd floor landing in scrubs and a coat that was damp at the shoulders, carrying her work bag in a tote that clinked like it had bottles in it. What's in the tote? I asked. Wine and a rotisserie chicken, she said. I was going to eat alone, but I've been on shift for 14 hours and I'm too tired to eat alone. Do you want to have dinner? I looked at the groceries. I was going to make pasta. Pasta and rotisserie chicken and wine, she said. Tell me that's not a better Friday night than either of us was going to have. It was. We both knew it was. I made the pasta while she sat at my counter and picked at the chicken and talked about her day in the way doctors talk about their days, specific enough to convey what happened without conveying too much, a careful editing that I could tell she did automatically. She was tired in the particular way of someone who had been running on purpose all day and had just allowed themselves to stop. She took off her shoes at the door. She tucked her feet up under herself on the bar stool. She stole a piece of pasta from the pot to test it without asking and said, more salt, and she was right. We ate at my kitchen table. I didn't have a proper dining table, just a round table with 2 chairs that I'd bought secondhand at an estate sale on Alberta Street when I first moved in. The chairs didn't match the table and I'd always meant to fix that and never had. Lily said she liked it. She said mismatched furniture meant someone actually lived there. After dinner, she opened the 2nd bottle of wine. I didn't argue. Can I ask you something? She said. Sure. Why did you move to Portland? You're not from here. You can tell? You still say you guys instead of y'all, and you were surprised the first time I told you the grocery store had decent food. She pointed at me. Midwest. Ohio, I said. Columbus. Okay, so why Portland? I thought about how to answer that. There's a version of the answer that's 2 sentences, and there's a version that takes most of a bottle of wine, and I was somewhere in the middle of both, which was maybe the most honest place to be. I needed a reset, I said. I'd been in a relationship for a long time that wasn't working, and I stayed in it longer than I should have because it was comfortable and because I didn't know what I'd be without it. And when it ended, I realized I'd been living like a person who was just trying not to rock the boat, and I was tired of that. So I took the first job offer that was in a city I'd never lived in. Lily looked at her wine glass. How long? 4 years. That's a long time to be comfortable. Yeah. I paused. What about you? Why Portland? Match, she said. I matched here for residency. I didn't choose it. It chose me. She smiled at that slightly. Though I think maybe I've been staying for reasons that have changed since then. Good reasons or complicated reasons. The kind where it's hard to tell the difference. I didn't push. She didn't explain further. We finished the line. It was close to midnight when she stood up to leave. She gathered her tote, picked up her coat from the back of the chair, and stood at my door. The wine had made things soft at the edges in the good way. And she was looking at me with an expression I was starting to recognize. The one where she was deciding something. This was good, she said. It was. I'm going to do that more. The not eating alone thing. Seems like a healthy development. She laughed quietly. Then she said, thank you for the pasta. And the company. And the original pliers. You can return the pliers anytime. I actually still have them, she said. I keep forgetting. I know. She paused. Then wait, you knew? You didn't say anything. They're pliers. I have more pliers. She shook her head, but she was smiling. She opened the door. She looked back once before she went out. Good night, neighbor, she said. Good night, Lily. November into December. We fell into something that didn't have a name yet, which was fine because I wasn't sure I wanted to name it. Friday dinners became a loose standing thing, not planned so much as assumed. Sometimes she brought the food. Sometimes I cooked. Once we ordered Thai from the place on Burnside and ate it sitting on my floor, because neither of us felt like sitting at the table, and she told me about a patient she'd lost that week. Not the details, but the weight of it, and I didn't try to fix anything about that. Just listened, and she said afterward that she didn't usually talk about the weight. I told her about the relationship I'd left. The full version, or close to it. How it hadn't ended badly so much as it had just ended. Like a song that fades out instead of finishing. How we've been living in the same house as two people who were politely done with each other, going to the grocery store together, watching TV together, occupying the same space without really inhabiting it. How the loneliest I'd ever felt was in the middle of that, not after. Lily was quiet when I finished. Then she said, that's the thing nobody tells you. That you can be the loneliest in the most populated version of your life. Yeah, I said. She looked at her hands. I had a version of that too. Different, but... She stopped. Different. You don't have to. I know. She looked up. That's why I want to. She told me about a guy she dated through most of medical school. Smart, she said. Genuinely brilliant. The kind of person who made you feel like you were the only person in the room. Except that when she'd gotten the residency match in Portland and he'd matched in Boston, he had expected her to give it up. Not asked. Expected. She said she remembered sitting in the car in the parking lot of the hospital reading the match results and knowing, in the clear and uncomplicated way you sometimes know things, that she wasn't going to do that she'd worked too hard and wanted it too much, and that love was real, but it wasn't supposed to cost you everything you'd built. Did he fight it? I asked. For about 3 days, then he stopped calling. She paused. She paused, which told me everything I needed to know. I'm sorry. Don't be, she said. Portland. She gestured broadly, meaning the apartment, meaning the city, maybe meaning me. And I wasn't sure what to do with that, so I didn't do anything with it except hold it quietly. December was cold. Portland cold, which is wet and gray more than it's bitter, but cold in a way that makes you want to be inside with the lights on. I found myself going to bed later than I used to, staying up to read or watch something, and I told myself this was just a winter thing, a natural recalibration. I told myself that with the full knowledge that I was lying to myself, which is a special kind of lying. The building had a small rooftop deck that nobody used in winter, but I'd gone up there twice just to get air, and I'd mentioned this to Lily once. She said that sounded like the kind of thing a person did when they had something they were trying to think through. I said maybe. She said she went for drives when she needed to think. I said at least the roof was easier to park. One night in mid-December, I was up late reading, and I heard footsteps above me. Her apartment was directly above mine, same layout, mirrored, and I thought about the fact that we were separated by about 11 inches of concrete and insulation. And she might also be awake, and I had the specific and somewhat alarming thought that this was information I cared about. I went to bed. The Friday before Christmas, she knocked on my door at 7. I opened it. She was in her good coat, the navy one, not the damp work coat, and she had her hair down, which I realized I hadn't seen before. She looked different. Not better or worse. Just different. The way someone looks when you've only ever seen them in one context and you suddenly see them in another. I made plans, she said. I'm going to go see that thing at the art museum. There's a photography exhibit. I looked it up, and it's supposed to be good, and I've been meaning to go for 2 months, and the last day is this weekend. Okay, I said. I was going to go alone, she said. And then I thought about it, and I didn't want to. We went to the museum. I don't know how to describe the exhibit except to say that it was photographs taken by a woman who'd spent 20 years documenting the same street in Chicago, the same block, and you could see in the images how the block changed. Buildings come back, the same front steps with different people sitting on them. And then sometimes the same people, older, in different arrangements. I stood in front of one photograph for a long time. It was just a man sitting on front steps reading a newspaper, and what the caption said was 1987. He had no idea someone was taking his picture. He just looked up when the shutter clicked. This mild and unsurprised look, like he didn't mind being seen. Lily was standing next to me looking at the same photo. He looks like someone who's exactly where he's supposed to be, she said. Yeah. I wonder if he knew that. Probably not, I said. You usually don't. She looked at me then, not to the photograph, at me. I looked back. Neither of us said anything. We got dinner after, a small Italian place on Northwest 23rd that she'd been to before and I hadn't, and we split the pasta and the tiramisu and talked about the photographs and about Chicago and about what it means to document a life versus living it. And at some point I noticed the restaurant had mostly emptied out and neither of us had suggested leaving. She was the one who finally said, we should probably go. Probably, I said. We took the bus back because neither of us had driven, and it was starting to drizzle. And we sat next to each other without quite touching, and the bus was mostly empty. Quiet. The city slipping past the rain-smeared windows in long orange and white streaks. She was looking out the window. I was looking at the reflection of her face in the glass. When we got back to the building, she stopped in the lobby. She said, I had a really good time. Me too. This felt different. From what? She looked at me. From other Fridays. I said, yeah, it did. She stood there for a second. Then she said, very quietly, like she was saying it mostly to herself and just also to me, I've been thinking about something for a while and I'm not sure what to do with it. I said, what? She said, you. I don't know what I thought was going to happen next. Some version of me, the one who'd been telling himself this was just neighborly, was waiting for me to find the sensible thing to say, to ease back, to give us both a way to pretend she hadn't said it. I didn't do that. I said, I've been thinking about you two since the Band-Aid, honestly. She laughed, not a joke laugh, a relieved one. The Band-Aid. The Band-Aid. She shook her head slightly. Then she looked up at me, and the lobby was quiet around us, and the rain was doing its Portland thing against the glass doors, and she said, what do we do with that? I thought about it for one actual second. Then I said, I think we go upstairs and figure it out. She made tea. I didn't expect that. I expected the conversation to continue, the circling and the deciding. But she went to her kitchen and put the kettle on, and I sat at her counter and looked around at the apartment that was the mirrored version of mine. The same bones arranged the other way, her floating shelf on the wall, now with a neat row of succulents on it, her medical book stacked on the coffee table, a photo on the refrigerator of her with two women I didn't know who I guessed were her sisters or close enough. She set 2 mugs down and sat across from me. I'm not good at the beginning parts, she said. What do you mean? I mean, I'm good at most things. I work hard and I'm usually not afraid of things that should be scary. But this. She gestured between us. The beginning is where I get careful. And careful turns into too slow, and too slow turns into nothing happening. And I end up where I was. And where was that? Alone. Which is fine. I'm fine alone. She stopped. I don't want to be careful this time. I said, then don't be. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, okay. We talked until 2 in the morning. Not about anything important exactly. About her family in Scottsdale, about a trip she wanted to take to Portugal, about the time I got lost on a job site in Cincinnati and ended up walking through an active concrete pour in my work boots. We laughed more than I expected. At some point the tea went cold and we didn't notice. At some point I was sitting on the same side of the counter as her, and I didn't remember moving. At 2 o'clock she said, "You should sleep." "I'm not tired." Liar. "Okay, a little tired." I stood up. She walked me to the door. We stood there for a moment in the particular way of people who are very aware of each other and not quite ready to stop being in the same room. She said, "This is the best Friday." I said, "It was." She leaned up and kissed me. Quick, certain, warm. The kind of kiss that is not a question but is also not the whole answer. Then she stepped back and looked at me with that one corner first smile and said, "Okay, now go to sleep." I went upstairs. I lay in the dark and listened to the rain in the city and whatever sounds the building made when I thought nobody was listening, and I thought about the fact that I had moved to Portland on purpose to be somewhere I'd never been, to be someone I hadn't figured out yet. And somewhere in the middle of that, I had put a Band-Aid on my neighbor's hand and lent her a pair of pliers I never asked back for. And here I was, upstairs, one floor above the person I'd just kissed, unable to sleep. She texted me the next morning at 7:43, which I know because I was already awake. The text said, "Good morning. I made too much coffee. If you want some, I'm home until noon." I went upstairs. She was in her kitchen in pajama pants and a faded Northwestern sweatshirt, and she handed me a mug without ceremony, and we stood at her window and drank coffee and looked out at the wet Portland morning, and she pointed out a building down the street and told me something about its history that I forgot almost immediately because I was mostly thinking about how she looked in the morning light coming through the window, and how I'd been so careful for so long about not wanting things that it had felt like a kind of safety, and how it turned out that safety and aliveness were not the same thing. We didn't talk about what we were or what this meant. That could wait. It could wait because we were here in the same room, and whatever this was, it was going to be something we had time for. She refilled my coffee without asking. I said, "You still have my pliers." She said, "I know," and she smiled. "They're staying." I think about the pliers sometimes. Not because they're special. They're a $12 pair of needle-nose pliers from a hardware store I don't even remember visiting, but because of what they represent, which is the specific and slightly absurd way that real things begin. I had spent a long time in Columbus being careful. Not careful in the smart way, the way that protects you from actual harm. Careful in the small way, the way that keeps you from asking for what you want, from saying what you mean, from letting people see the parts of you that might need something. I thought that kind of careful was the same as being strong. I was wrong about that. What I was actually doing was making myself smaller and smaller and calling it stability. When things ended with my ex, I didn't fall apart the way I expected to. I just felt the particular exhaustion of someone who had been performing okayness for so long that they'd forgotten what actual okayness felt like. And I moved to Portland not because I had a plan, but because I had the basic intelligence to understand that staying in the same place doing the same things would produce the same result. That was the first honest decision I'd made in a while, just admitting that something needed to change, and then actually changing it. Lily had done the same thing years earlier in that parking lot, reading a match result on her phone and knowing without drama or deliberation that she wasn't going to give up what she'd worked for, not even for someone she loved. That takes a different kind of strength. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind that comes from knowing your own worth clearly enough that you don't have to argue for it. She didn't leave because she stopped caring. She left because she respected herself enough to go towards something, not just away from pain. What I find true, looking back at all of it, is that we both had to make hard and honest choices before any of this was possible. I had to stop pretending a finished thing was still working. She had to choose her own life over someone else's expectation of it. Neither of those choices felt good at the time. Both of them were right. And the rightness of them is what made space for whatever this turned into. Not luck, not timing, just the accumulated result of two people who had finally decided to stop lying to themselves. There's something in that I keep coming back to. The world doesn't reward carefulness, not the shrinking kind. It rewards honesty, with other people, and more importantly with yourself. It rewards the willingness to keep showing up after hard things. To stay curious, to not close down just because closing down feels safer. Lily knocked on my door, bleeding from a shelf bracket, and I handed her a Band-Aid, and that was it. That was the whole beginning, and it only happened because I'd moved here, and she'd matched here, and we'd both done the work of being people who were actually trying to live their lives instead of just getting through them. I kept the pliers on my kitchen counter for a while after that, just as a reminder. Not of her. I didn't need a reminder of her, she was upstairs, but of the fact that the real thing starts small and ordinary, and usually when you're not prepared for them. You just have to be willing to open the door.